Hey guys, I have someone today from the Texas Police Department. He's going to tell you more about him. His name is Tony Godwin. Tony, why don't you tell us what you do?
I'm assigned to the Northern Texas Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. That's a nationwide task force that consists of people with specialized training. And so, generally, what that means is anything that involves the internet, cell phones, computers, gaming systems, anything that involves child exploitation on any level that involves kids, then that's what falls under my purview.
You said that you are based in Texas.
Correct.
You handle the entire country.
The task force is a nationwide task force, but every state is broken up into different sections of the same task force. And so, across the board, we have a lot of ability to work with each other if things cross state lines or cross boundaries where we can reach out to other investigators, that kind of stuff.
The reason why we are here and we are talking is because I'm a filmmaker in New York, and we are creating a film called Trapped. The story came out of a small little town called Linton in North Dakota. I was filming another film of mine there, and I bumped into this girl, and she kept coming to the set, and she spoke to me about herself. She felt comfortable with me, so she spoke to me about herself and about her life and what had happened with her, where she was abused at home and so on. I didn't think much, meaning I didn't think that it was such a widespread pandemic. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about the numbers in terms of children age wise, and how it has increased or decreased in the past 3 years?
So, for here in Texas, by definition of law, our age of consent is 17. And so, at the age of 17, someone is considered an adult as far as a crime takes place. However, federally, the statute states under 18, so 17 is included in that. Primarily, what we deal with here involve, kids who are in a very, very young age, toddlers, all the way up until, all the way up into high school age. Now, I specifically work, and I mean that by saying hands-on offenses. There are hands-on offenses that involve every age at every level, no matter what. Now, what I specifically deal with is online related, and so that generally tends to be, well, now it's getting younger. Some in elementary school. A lot of kids have telephones and have internet service and packages. They use third-party applications, and then clearly, as they get into middle school, we know that expands and gets much more involved, and then obviously into high school. And so that's pretty much how it happens in the age demographic of who I deal with. As far as how it's increased, I can tell you it's increased exponentially. Back when COVID hit, we saw a time frame of being unsure, not really knowing what to do. What are we doing with all these kids? There's no school. And so in a lot of areas, in a lot of states, and a lot of cities, practically all of them, they were forced to go online. And so we had this virtual classrooms and virtual classes and virtual this and virtual that. And from that point in time, we've seen increases exponentially higher than you could ever imagine, because, along with anything virtual, there's some negative component that comes along with it. And there's the predatory type of individual who is seeking out those kids who are vulnerable, who are alone, and who they have access to. And through the internet, it's a borderless crime. They can be anywhere and do anything they want. And,
Yeah.
they run the risk of hopefully not getting caught in their eyes. But for us, it compounds things tremendously.
So what is the majority of the age group?
The majority right now is middle school and high school. So 6th grade through 12th grade. And that can be anywhere from 10 or 11, up to 17 or just under 18.
10-year-old girl or boy is getting on the internet and getting abused?
Kids, they don't know anything but technology. They've grown up with it their whole lives. They There are kids, elementary school kids who know how to navigate a phone sometimes better than a parent. And so a lot of parents are buying devices for their children at much younger and younger ages. And so as a result of that, kids know what these third party applications are. They know what Instagram is, and they know what Be Real is, and Snapchat, and all of the other platforms where uh, all of their friends are on and communicating. And so that's pretty much what happens. They get online for a social setting, or sometimes it's a school thing. Sometimes it's a group that for a club or a class that they're in. And so when that happens, there are people who have a propensity for children, a sexual propensity for children, who are lurking in these same sort of rooms. And so it becomes a process first to be accepted as a friend, which is not difficult to do at all, because kids sort of crave attention and they like the attention. And I'm not saying that they're seeking this out, because that's not it at all. They are just seeking people to be friends with, and so they don't always know who they're connecting with, even though their parents are probably explaining to them, hey, you need to be very cautious, you need to be very careful. You can only be friends with someone that you really know in real life. And we know the reality of that is that's not how it works. They do have those friends, but they also have people who are friends of friends and friends of other friends, um, and so they see those connections. And so when a predatory type person gets into that child's account, it usually and typically begins somewhat innocently, but it shifts very, very rapidly. And so the grooming process begins very early, and this is for boys and girls. And once that grooming gets to what they're wanting, which is typically content, photographs and videos and things like that, there are a segment of those who are predatory in nature who want a physical relationship, who want to physically meet a child in real life. And while that may take some time of grooming and communicating with that child, they put in the time because they know that they can have great success with it. My job wouldn't exist if the predators weren't successful. And that's the sad part, is we're in this to save kids. We're in this to, make sure that they're not harmed. And so we work extra hard and extra special in order to try to prevent that.
After they have spoken to the children, they ask for sexual photographs. And that is one form of abuse. And the
Correct.
other form of abuse would be when the predator, the adult in this
Right.
relationship, tries to meet with a child. Now,
Correct.
when when I speak about meeting with a child, I mean a 10-year-old. They are willing to meet a 10, they want to, sorry, not willing, but they want to meet a 10-year-old to have sex with.
100%. They, trust me, if they could get the only thing that prevents someone who's doing activities online, like visually looking at things and getting sexual gratification from imagery or videos that are online, the only thing that prevents that person from being a hands-on, offender is access and availability. That's really the only two things that block that child from being a hands-on victim. Now, granted, they're still victimized if they send inappropriate material, pictures and videos or whatever. That child is still victimized. They're still a victim. Um, it just runs the gamut from what we see when we do arrest these individuals and some of the claims they make in court, where I never met that child in real life, and they look at it as a victimless crime, and it's not a victimless crime. It's very much victim oriented, and that's how we strive to work our investigations. We are victim focused. We learn based on real live events, so we know that based on and I can talk about it if you want, or you can, I can get to it later, but primarily we work cases one of a couple ways. One of them is called reactive, meaning you have a child and you encounter something on your child's device that is very questionable. Maybe it's sexual in nature, maybe it's communications that are sexually graphic, or maybe it's imagery or videos. And you, being a good parent, to check your child's device and monitor what's going on, you find this material and you are shocked, you are saddened, you are upset, you're angry. And so you make a police report. You go to your local police station and you make a report to say, hey, this is what this is what I found. What do we do? And so we call those reactive cases. And so when I've worked in this field, I've been in law enforcement for 30 years, but I've done this for 18 of those 30 years. And so when I first started back in 2005-ish, reactive cases came in, but just not very frequently, not at
The
any fault to
parents,
any parents. Yeah, they just, they weren't as diligent then as they are today. And so in today's environment, we get a lot of reactive cases. We have a lot more parents. We do a lot of education, a lot of training for the community to let them know that, hey, you have rights as a parent, and these are the safety things that you should do.
are the parents some way held accountable for a minor who is under the age of 18 having to send out a photograph to this predator? Shouldn't the parent, it's the parent's responsibility, am I right about that? So why shouldn't the parent be held accountable for this?
There are a lot of parents who just really don't have the knowledge. A lot of parents didn't grow up with technology the way our young people do today. So they are limited in what they know. And so they know that what's right and wrong, and they know the difference between bad and good, and of course those sort of things. And I think most parents, or at least the overwhelming majority of the ones that I've encountered, their heart's in the right place. They're telling their children, to be careful and be cautious. There's predators and different people out there to hurt them, all of those sort of things. And so when sometimes this happens and they encounter this type of material or this content, they're as taken aback by it as anybody else. And so in that instance, while I understand, yeah, there are some parent responsibilities, and I do believe that parents on some level need to bear some responsibility and accountability. I know here in Texas, criminally, it's rare that happens. It's rare. Now, if we find a parent who is culpable in any way, and believe it or not, there are crimes, this crime type, that involve parents who willingly and allow their own children to be involved in this sort of activity, these sexual behaviors, this deviance that exists.
The parent is telling their child who's
Sometimes.
of underage to encounter or to take or to do this because the
Participate.
parent is participating in it, because the parent is getting something out of it. Like, what do the
Sometimes.
parents get? Financially rewarded?
Sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's motivated because of addictions to drugs and alcohol and lifestyle that they lead. I know it's shocking to hear, and for your listeners to hear or watch or be able to see that there's people out there that could do that to their own children, because nobody's used to hearing that. Nobody should be comfortable with that, and we are not comfortable with that. So in cases where we have parents who allow their children into this world, 100% we hold them accountable, because we arrest them. We remove those kids from that situation. And we do everything we can to put those children back on a restorative path to recover and get through this and have support, the kind of support they should have. And we criminally prosecute those adults who are involved.
What is the punishment for a person who is behaving in this manner and asking the child to send imagery?
For here in Texas, that can range. In the beginning, when grooming is taking place and the communications revolve around a sexually graphic deviance or involves photographs, there's a number of charges that can be put into play. Here in Texas, and I'll just name off 3 or 4 that I think would apply. We have one called sexual performance of a child in Texas, meaning I have asked you I'm an adult, and I ask you as a child to do something very specific. I want you to act this deviant act out, whether it's on video or whether it's on film, camera, pictures, or something like that. So that's one context. The other context is called online solicitation of a minor, meaning I, as an adult, am communicating online in a sexually deviant way for gratification for me or anybody else, to try to get that child to do something deviant. That's another charge. That's a third-degree felony, can be a second-degree felony based on the age of the child. If I'm a predatory person and I get a child to actually take a photograph that is inappropriate, nude, or make a video of something deviant or sexually graphic, and I get that child to send that photo or that video, there's a number of things that are violations of the law. Number one is, and the most serious, is called production of child pornography. Statutorily, we call it child pornography in Texas. I hate the word. I hate the terminology, child pornography. As an industry standard, we use a term called CSAM, which is child sexual abuse material. And to me, because that's really what it is, it's a visual depiction of a child being sexually demonized. It's horrific, and it needs to be called what it is. So on that level, it's called production. They have gotten a child to produce something that is a crime. That's a first-degree felony. That means you go to prison if you get convicted to life. You could get life on a first-degree felony.
Life for
You
that.
could get life. You primarily don't. Yeah, you primarily don't, but you could. And then it scales from there. Production leads to possession, because if that child sends that imagery or that video to someone and they have it on their computer, they have it on their phone, their hard drive, they now possess it. That's also a felony, just a lower level felony. If they then shared it, if you and I were in a group and we had the similar interest, and I asked you, hey, what do you like? And you asked me what I like, and we shared imagery or things like that. On the state level here, we call that promotion, meaning that we're promoting that with another individual. And so we also have the luxury to have both state and federal charges apply, because depending on where you're at in the country, depends on the type of criminal sentence that you can get. Sometimes it turns into what's just regular probation, like that's a slap on the hand. Most of these offenses require registration as a sex offender upon completion of any prison term that comes from it. Federally, we do, here in Texas anyway, the charging guidelines and the sentences are much, much, much higher than they are in the state courts. And the feds also have what are called mandatory minimums. So as an example, I gave you the example of production, meaning I or a predator has asked a child to produce this video, this image, and they do. So in the federal system, that's a 15-year minimum per count. So if they've gotten this child to produce 100 images or 100 videos or some combination thereof, then they technically could be indicted for each one of those. That doesn't typically happen, but it could happen. And so we often see offenders convicted on the federal side with much higher, more significant charges and lengths of time in prison, sometimes anywhere between 10 years and I think I've had one that got 60 years is the highest so far. So it's definitely a big hit if they get convicted federally.
So what happens to the child?
We are victim focused from the onset. And so that is our primary concern from the gate. As soon as we jump through the gate, that's our only concern is the child. And so the child goes through a process called a forensic interview, and that's at a special place called a Children's Advocacy Center. And those are all over the country. Dallas has one of the most premier ones in the country, the best of the best, in my opinion. And I know I'm biased because this is where I'm from, but they are fantastic. And so it's geared to speak to a child in a manner that they are comfortable. And if they were to disclose, this is what happened, or this is what happened, or this is what led to this, then we know as law enforcement, we are there to watch the interview, but we're not present in the actual room. There's a trained special forensic interviewer that's there. Along with that staff, they have medical, they have psychological, they have therapy, they have counseling, they have every single aspect. It's called an MDT process, a multidisciplinary team process. The prosecution is involved in that, medical is involved in that, therapy, counseling, forensic interviews, law enforcement. Everybody comes together in a team effort, this MDT process, to put that child back on a restorative path, to work through it, however long it takes, and it's 100% free. Doesn't cost them a dime.
Are these children coming from a certain area, a demographic?
As I said earlier, it's a borderless crime, and it knows no boundaries. It doesn't know any specific socioeconomic status or level. It's from single families, from or single parent families, from multi-parent families. It makes no difference. It's from all. It's the blue collar worker who has a couple of kids, all the way up to the surgeon who has a couple of kids. It doesn't have any boundary as far as what that involves or what that does. And so, as a result, that's why we keep it as victim focused as we can.
So, if you could describe a little bit about what your day consists of, or how does your team go about finding this predator online, is
Okay.
I think it's a crazy business. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
how do you guys do this?
So I told you how we primarily get cases. One is called reactive. The other way that we do cases is called proactive. And what that means is, I say this often when I do trainings. I say I'm the hottest 12-year-old girl on the internet because I go online and I portray myself to be a 10, 11, 12-year-old girl, 10, 11, 12-year-old boy, and I wait to be contacted. The concept behind that is everything we do is based on a real case that we've worked. So we know that real children have been exploited. We know that real children have been, crimes have been committed against them, and they have suffered greatly from it. And so we know how they talk, we know how they react, we know how they respond. And so the idea for the task force is that we have highly trained, specially trained people who have the capability and mindset to work in that undercover capacity, which is what we do. And we put ourselves out there portraying to be children with the whole hope that that predator who's online on that platform will meet me versus a real child. And so, depending on what happens in that setting, I can tell you it's like fish in a barrel. It's literally like fish in a barrel. It doesn't take long. And so a day-to-day situation may look like me working a reactive case, maybe one that a parent, reported and brought into the police station to make us aware of this or that. And then it may stem into me spending 6 or 8 hours online in platforms where I know children go and seeking out those who are sort of predatory in nature and try to build a case based on what they say.
And how long does your team and yourself pretend to be this?
The fastest time ever from the minute I logged on in an undercover capacity until I was putting handcuffs on a guy was 45 minutes. That's the fastest, 45 minutes. And the longest I've gone is 18 months. I talked to an individual for 18 months before able to put handcuffs on him.
He was or she was grooming you, who he thought was a 12-year-old girl.
Yep.
18 months. They have the time and the patience and the drive to put 18 months into a minor.
At the end of the day, in their eyes only, what are they going to get as a result? If they wait it out, if they have the patience, if they have the ability and the reasoning, their own reasoning, it's not smart, but it's reasoning to them. And if they succeed, they get the ultimate prize. They get what they want. They get to be hands-on with a child. And because that's how they're hardwired, that's what's going on in their minds.
Are there frequently cases where they exchange hands, meaning they are the predators for other men or women as well? Like, do they resell these children somehow?
Another aspect of this job involves 2 different areas. One is called basically file sharing, peer-to-peer file sharing. And so that file sharing, what that means is there are publicly available programs that are free. And so let's just use an example. If you have an interest in muscle cars from the 60s, and I have an interest in muscle cars from the 60s, we could go on, and you may not know me, and I may not know you, but my computer could connect to your computer. And if you have a collection of really cool muscle cars from the 60s and 70s, and I have a really cool collection of pictures from there, you and I could share those files, and we've never even seen each other. We've never spoken a word to each other. You go through these publicly available programs, you enter a search term for what you have an interest in, 60s muscle cars, and it will show you anybody on the planet who has the same interest. And it's just numbers. It's just an IP. It's just a number. And so I don't know you, and I just go, and you have what's called a shared folder. Inside that shared folder is all of your collection of every muscle car that you've ever seen in your entire life that you love and one day would love to own. And I have the same thing on my computer. So I can do what's called a single source, one-to-one. I can connect my computer here in my office to your computer in your home or in your office or wherever that is, and I can go to your shared folder and I can download everything that you have in that folder. And now think of it in the context of child exploitation. The material that is generated, self-generated material that children are making when they're convinced and coerced to do these photos and videos, are widely shared around the globe, widely shared. Like, I can't even begin to tell you, the problem is so significant. It's so incredible. I could just use an example. In my city alone here, and we are, 350,000 people, we could arrest 2 or 3 people a week, every week for a decade, and we would never run out.
Where is this coming from? Like, where is this coming? Like, where did we get twisted to think that having sex with a minor is good?
Well, there's a lot that's gone on. What I can tell you is that it's gone on for a very, very long time, decades and decades. As long as the internet's basically existed, it has been an issue. Now, there are places you can go in this world, in other countries, where it's not frowned upon for an adult to have a sexual encounter with a child. And sadly, that feeds a lot of people who have this propensity. And so things are being done and produced and made in sometimes other countries, but I don't want to send the message that it's another country's problem. It's not another country's problem. It's a problem here in the US, because what I will tell you is the number one consumer of that type of material is the United States of America. A 100%. Yeah. I suspect that's one issue. I mean, here in the United States, we have a lot of liberties and a lot of freedoms that people don't have in other places. And so as a result of those freedoms and those jobs, that people are making wages, ridiculous amounts of money to do things in this country that, people only dream and fantasize about in other countries. But I don't want you to think that it doesn't happen here in the US, because it does. Self-generated child sex abuse material, meaning children who are producing these pictures and videos at the request of predatory types, is just a significant problem here in the US as it is the stuff that comes from overseas. And so one thing to keep in mind is the people who collect that material have been collecting it forever, and they keep their collections forever. They just don't get rid of it. Even though it's so much material, they could never look at it all. I arrested a guy one time who had, now this is his own claim, he had over 1 million images. And so that was back 1 million of child sex abuse material images and videos. And that was in 2009 timeframe. And 1 million images today is a scratch. This is nothing.
Are these for resale? Are they for their own use?
If they think that they could get that material to somebody else who'd be willing to pay for it, and there's a low risk of getting caught, absolutely, they will turn it into a money-making venture. But as far as collecting, they still collect, they still keep it, and they still use it for their own personal gratification. It's a huge, huge epidemic, and very, very problematic.
After COVID, it has increased.
Because where were all the kids at that point? They're all online, every one of them. They were forced to go online and do online training with class and schools. And there's a number of stories you could research and see where those who have a propensity for children interjected themselves into, say, a Zoom meeting with a classroom of 35 kids with one teacher. And then all of a sudden, some sort of child sex abuse material would flash on the screen because they were invading these settings where children exist. And so it's a vicious, ugly world that we live in, unfortunately.
I am very shocked at some of the conversations that I have with other parents. I'm a parent myself, with other parents or other people who refuse to believe that this is happening in the United States, not just to the adults, but also to the children. So, what would a person like you, who has been doing it for such a long time, what would be your first three advice?
Parents need to be intentional with their kids. That technology that they give them in the form of a brand new iPhone with full unfettered access to the internet is not intended to be a babysitter or just to occupy that child's time. There has to be some intentional interaction and communications. A parent needs to lean in because, listen, you know your children. And if you see some behavior changes, attitudes, arguments, they're dismissive, the phone gets turned off or put away the minute you walk in, uh, there are boundaries that a parent needs to set. So in my house with my kids growing up, there were, where do you think the worst place a child could be alone with a phone? What would you think as a parent? Where would you not want your child to be?
In the bedroom.
Now, that's the number one answer that people will say is the bedroom. And I agree, it is a very important place for them not to have the access and availability in private. But the number one place is the bathroom. Because listen to this. If your child was in their room, what's to stop you from opening the door and going in and checking on your child? Absolutely nothing. Obviously, they could lock the door and you would probably not be happy with that and force your way into there. But
Right,
how many parents would walk into their children who are in the bathroom?
right,
It's the one place in a home where people feel they have the most, outside of the parents, right? As the kids barge in while you're in the bathroom or whatever.
right.
Um, that's where they know
I never
there's
thought
a
about
very
that.
they have a very low risk of somebody ever coming in and disturbing them while they're in that private setting. So in my home, and my kids were raised like, we don't take phones to the bathroom. That's not what we do because that's not where it's intended. Because you're in a target-rich environment to be able to do something that you may not normally do in another part of the house. So that intentionality and those boundaries, those rules, that's one of them. Number two, I would say, is learn the technology. Now, I go all over the country. I teach law enforcement all over the country. And while I'm in another state teaching law enforcement, I will also, with the partner that I teach with, we will go and do a public event. Like we'll hold a public event in the town that we're in, and we'll invite parents, to a local church or center or whatever, in order to educate them because education is the key, right? And so we go to these meetings, and I see before the meeting starts, every parent is on their device, right? They're all checking in on their Facebooks and Instagrams and doing whatever they're doing, sending their emails and their banking. And then when we start the presentation and we give them some practical advice like this intentionality, the first few people will say, I don't understand the technology. And I say, well, yeah, you do, because I saw you on your phone. I saw you doing a selfie, for Instagram later. So you do know the technology. You just need to embrace the technology your child uses. And so there are lots of platforms where you, as a parent, could get monitoring software. You could have something on your child's device that monitors, but that doesn't replace you as a parent. It's just a tool to use so that you're updated more frequently as to what your child is actually doing. Your child needs to know that there's monitoring software on that device. Your child needs to know that if any point in time you as a parent say, hand me the phone, I want to do a spot check. And I don't mean you do it at the same time every week, every Saturday at 2 o'clock. No, you do it at like 8 o'clock at night and you do it at 6 o'clock in the morning. You change it up because you want to be able to know exactly what your child's doing. And I'll tell you this, predator types online and in person are going to look for the most vulnerable kids. The kid who may be distanced a little bit, maybe not the most popular kid in the school, right? A predator would love to get their hands on the football captain or the head cheerleader or whoever. But what comes with those positions? Lots of notoriety, lots of friends, lots of other things, more chance of getting caught. So they will tend sometimes to look for the more vulnerable child, the child who maybe doesn't have as many friends as the head cheerleader or the football captain or whoever. And so that's sometimes where they will target themselves. Maybe the kids with a little less self-esteem. But make no mistake, no child is safe in an online environment if they don't know who they're communicating with. And then I think the last bit of advice I would say is, because a lot of parents will say, okay, you've burned my house down with information. Now what do we do? What if I've already encountered something? What if it's too late? I just encountered something. And my first response is, don't freak out. Don't panic, because that's what tends to happen. The biggest advice I could tell you there is, if a father finds out first that something has gone on that appears to be criminal and it involves an adult and their baby girl or baby boy, dads tend to freak out. They get very aggressive. There's sometimes, hey, I know where you live. I'm coming to burn your house down. I'm going to, do this, and you're going to be prosecuted 100%. And where does that predator go? He deletes everything, gets rid of it, and he tries to move on and hope that the door's not going to get kicked in by the cops. When moms find out about this kind of stuff, moms have a tendency to get the information off of their child's phone. Sometimes they will just forward it to their own phone. That's a no-go. You never need to do that, because that's a crime. If your child produced a video or picture that by definition is a crime, and you forward it from their phone to your phone, you're now in possession of that material, and that is a crime. So that means not only would the child's device be involved in an investigation, but the parent's device might be involved in that investigation. And so we don't want to ever do that. Moms also have a tendency to think that they're going to help the police by continuing the communications or continuing with the ruse as the mom now portraying their child, so that the child's not exposed to that. Because a lot of moms will think, well, I'll just help the police. If it's me they're talking to, my child's not getting exposed, and I can extract some information for the police. And that is the absolute 100% worst thing that a parent could do, is to pose as their child with one of these predatory types, because it gives that predator an automatic defense. Think of it, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months later down the road, that person's in court having to go before a judge or a jury to say, I knew it was the mom the whole time, even though it's not true, at all. It's something they can throw on the wall and it sticks. And then the next thing you know, a jury's like, oh, well, it's not a crime to talk to an adult. Or he says, I was role playing. I was just goofing. I knew it was an adult the whole time. So never respond, and just try to limit your freak out and your panic. Try to keep it reserved, because remember, children in today's environment are tied to these like it's attached to their body. So when you remove that from them, it's like they've gotten an arm amputated or their wrist has been amputated. They don't know how to exist without technology. And trust me, they're going to get over it. Seize the device, take the device, explain to them as calmly as possible, this is inappropriate. You're not in any trouble. That we do not have a practice of turning children into offenders on any level. We're not going to do that. We're not going to go charge a child for doing something. It would have to be so super crazy egregious for that to happen. It's very, very, very rare that we will ever do that. We treat children what they are. They are victims. And so when we encounter them as victims, we do everything that we can to get them back on a restorative path. Empower them to do good.
There are things that these days, I was listening to my son last night, and he is not a child anymore. He's 25
Right.
years old.
Right.
And he's talking about my younger son, Troy, while he's playing a game with
Okay.
his other friends. My
Right.
younger son is not in New York. My younger son is in Vermont. He's in college over there. And he's like,
Right.
Troy, don't do this, and Troy, do this. And I'm like, appears like Troy was right there. And then when
Sure.
I spoke with him, yeah, apparently Troy connected from Vermont, Jared is in New York, and they have all their
Right.
friends connected. And sometimes they also get other people to come in who
Sure.
they don't know,
100%.
So
100%. And that's one of the dangers. Yeah, for sure. I could give you a resource right now where you could go and we kind of consider it a one-stop shop. So the my buddy that I teach with, I trained him how to do this job, and so he's hit the ground running. And he works for a different agency than me. But about 3.5 years ago, we started a podcast where we talk about cases that we've made. It can be very explicit. I'll be the first to tell you, but it has morphed into a couple things. It morphed into what we believe we wanted it and intended it to be in the beginning, which was the ability to raise awareness and educate people. It's been very good. It's been very successful. I would have never envisioned it would have gotten the popularity that it's gotten, but it has really hit the ground running, and it reaches a lot of people. Like I thought we'd have about 10 listeners, and
yeah,
we were getting 3,000 listeners a week.
wow,
So let me show you. I have it right here on my phone. If you can see
great.
that, you see that logo? It's
Yeah,
called
Catfish Cops.
Catfish Cops. That's a
Great.
podcast. It's on Apple. It's on Spotify. It's on Google Stitcher. Anywhere you can get a podcast, it's out
Well,
there.
that's
You could
great.
go to my website. It's called catfishcops.com. And on that website, you'll see a tab that says resources. And in the resources tab, it's full of information. Now, if there's a parent that you know that doesn't understand Snapchat or the settings for certain platforms, you can click a link and we can give you a one-page fact sheet about that specific application and maybe some settings that you could use and choose for your own kids or their kids to make it a little bit safer. And there's all sorts of information on there. There's resources for monitoring programs. Bark is one. We don't receive compensation from any of this. It's just that's what I use with my son. I have a son who's in high school, and I've used it on his device since middle school, since he was in 8th grade. And so there's all kinds of resources on there. There's victim resources.
Thank you. Thanks a lot
You're welcome.
for sharing the information. I know it was just the surface. And for that purpose, I'm going to ask you to come back to us if that's okay
Sure.
with you.
Perfectly fine.
We really appreciate the kind of work that you do, and I appreciate that you got on and took out time from the important work that you do.
No problem. This is important too. So I appreciate the opportunity. Anytime you want me back, just give me a little heads up.